And today I'm interviewing John Bray, Kiwi 428. Morning, John. Would you
Morning,
like
Gary.
to give us a brief resume of how you became involved in rugby league? Because I know you're from the South Island as opposed to an Aucklander, and I'd just like to know how your involvement started.
Well, I was very lucky. I grew up in Hornby, which was a working class suburb on the outskirts of Christchurch, just before you reach the countryside, and rugby league was the only sport that was played. It was a game that everyone played, and everyone knew everyone. And at home, I learnt, I suppose, to play before I went to school. My elder brother was a rugby league person, and he taught me how to play the ball, so I could play the ball before I even went to school. So that was how I got involved, and rugby league was the only sport in the district. There was no summer sport. There was no sport in the winter other than rugby league. So everyone played the game, and in my street, for instance, the bloke next door played for the South Island. The old 2 doors away, the Mackenzies lived. Bill Mackenzie was a Kiwi in the 1947s and 52 era. His brother was the head of the West Coast Rugby League, and so I went on. So I was very fortunate that I got involved in where I grew up.
So you always played for Hornby, and you represented Canterbury in all grades through the years during your schoolboy years as well?
Yes, I think that was probably the case. I always managed to play for Canterbury, and we went to the West Coast every year, which was a real eye opener for a young kid.
And you, of course, would have played against Auckland back in those days, who used to travel down.
Well, we played against, when I got into the seniors, we played against Auckland every second year. Auckland used to come down, and I was lucky to play in Canterbury teams which were very compatible with Auckland. We drew 10-all once, I can remember, and we beat them once. They normally used to win quite easily, but I was in an era when Canterbury had very strong teams.
And the pinnacle of your career was obviously 1964 when you were selected for the Kiwis. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I guess so. That was every young kid's ambition to play for the Kiwis, and I got the opportunity to play against France in 1964, and I relished it. It was a great experience.
Now, that was 1964. You were 23 or 24 years of age. Kiwis toured England and France next year. Any reason why you weren't selected?
Yeah, there's a big story in there, really. In 1965, I pulled a hamstring early in the year, and in those days there was no proper fix. You just had to wait your time, and so I had a few weeks out. But I guess the main reason was that unlike most people from Hornby, I was studying for a degree, and in those days there was no such thing as student loans or help from the government, and my parents weren't in a situation where they could afford to send me to university full time, so I went part-time, and I was doing night classes, and so that was very difficult. I was working, and that clashed with football training, so I used to pick the subjects at night that weren't on the days that football was training, and luckily I passed a few of those, and got to the stage in the end that in 1965 that I had two subjects to do to complete an accounting degree. The times didn't coincide with football training. It was an amateurish game. There was no money involved. We're all well-paid amateurs getting nothing, and So I had to make a hard decision, but and that was probably the hardest decision I ever made at that stage. But looking back, it was the right decision. But when you're a young kid at 23 and all you look forward to is doing a tour to UK and France in 1965, and the interesting thing was there was the bloke who ran the Hornby Rugby League Club was a freezing worker, because it was really a freezing work town, the Islington Freezing Works, and most kids had as soon as they left school and turned 15, they went straight to the freezing works, picks up adults' wages, and they couldn't believe their good luck. There was full employment, and I was a little bit different from that, so I had to make this choice. And the head of the Hornby Rugby League Club said to me, he knew I was dithering about what to do, and I'm giving up my studies when I was just about finished, or else go for a tour. He said to me, "What rugby league needs is good administrators. What they have got plenty of is good players." He said, "So you'd be better to the game to concentrate on administration." So I always heeded that advice, and since then I've been involved in administration ever since, starting with the Hornby Club.
So in 1976, you moved from Christchurch to Wellington as part of your job, and you immediately got elected to Wellington Border Control for a couple of years, which started your administration service at the top level of the game. Is that right?
Yeah, that was interesting. In 1976, I got a transfer to a head office in Wellington, and I thought I was going to be there for the rest of my life. And I ran into Colin O'Neill, who was a hooker for the Kiwis, and I knew I'd been on training camps with him, and he put in a word for me. And next minute, I get this call, and I've been invited to join the Wellington Board of Directors, which I did for 2 years, and that was my first big time experience in the upper level.
And then it became better because you relocated to Auckland in 1978, where you've been ever since, and there was a different structure in New Zealand Rugby League with the board in those days, and you became the Canterbury delegate on the board.
Yeah, in those days there was a delegate system, and each province had a delegate, and usually they appointed local people. So Aucklanders represented the provinces; they represented someone, so they didn't have to travel. So in those days you didn't travel from Canterbury to the West Coast. But of course, as soon as I went up there, Canterbury saw it as an opportunity as a one-eyed Cantabrian that I would represent them on the board, which I did until 2 or 3 years later the system changed and they went to a new system of elected rugby league directors, which I was fortunate enough to get selected on in 1982, I think it was, 1 or 2.
And during the turmoil we had in the early 2000s, you actually became an independent director after that restructure.
Well, I was a director at that stage, right from '82, which was independent, but it was rugby league knowledgeable, right through to about 2000, and then I retired after that. But I got called back, and there was a problem in 2008 or 10 or something, and the rugby league got into a bit of difficulty, and I got asked if, with my experience and my business background, whether I'd come back and give them a hand, which I did for a short period.
So you served under two very good chairmen during that time, one being Ron McGregor and the other being George Rainey. And as a result of that, you were elected a vice chairman in latter years as well. So
yeah. Well, they were in those days. Rugby league was run by rugby league people, and that's how I've always viewed it. Should be they should be knowledgeable, experienced rugby league people. And Ron McGregor was a chartered accountant, and he had a lot of experience. He was an ex-Kiwi. He had a lot of experience with rugby league from club, provincial, and he was a very good person. but I admired George Rainey. He was a hard-headed, knowledgeable businessman, ran his own business. He was involved in Auckland. He'd been involved with Glenora Club in Auckland. He was a great administrator, and rugby league would do with more people like him today.
So you then moved on, you managed several teams in the 1980s, and of course you were the manager of the 1987 Kiwi team. Can you remember who you beat that year?
Yeah, in 1987 we did a tour of Australia and PNG, and the test against Australia was one of the most memorable games I've ever been associated with. We were a team of nobodies from New Zealand. They were straight went from the club football to the New Zealand team. The only outsider we had in was Dean Bell, who in that stage was playing for Wigan, and he came back and played for New Zealand. Hugh McGahn, who would normally have done that, was hurt and he didn't play, and so Dean Bell was the only real outsider. We went, so it was a great team, and it was a great effort, because when you looked at the Australian team that we played against, they were top people. You know, there's Peter Sterling and Wally Lewis,
Mel Meninga.
Well, in the Harvest, yeah, Mel Meninga, Dale Shearer, you know, and we were a bunch of nobodies, and
of course, part of it which really made your whole tour was that the entire front row were from your beloved Hornby, weren't they?
Yeah, well, that was interesting. When I got involved in the administration, and I believe this to this day, you've got to concentrate on the grassroots. You've got to, and in Hornby, because we were a league district, at one stage we had 25 schoolboy teams, which is almost unheard of these days, and we encouraged every kid to play, and that team I coached and that I managed in 1987, the entire front row came from those kids from Hornby. Wayne Wallace, who lived down, when I was growing up, he was a little kid down the end of the street, 5 years of age. He was the hooker, and there was Adrian Shelford and Ross Taylor, and they comprised the front row. But yeah, no, it was a great team effort, and you know, the halves and you know, they were against Wally Lewis and Peter Sterling, but Shane Cooper outplayed them when he was playing standoff.
I mean, one of the great tackles in that game was Nicky Wright tackling Mel Meninga, scraping all the skin off his nose down the sideline. Now, you then carried on and you managed the 1988 World Cup team, where we beat Great Britain down in Christchurch, but unfortunately the following week we lost to Australia at Eden Park.
Yeah, well, I should count that in 1988, when we played Great Britain, when I went back to my school days, I went to Christchurch Boys High, which was unheard of from kids from Hornby, and you had to fill in a form which said, what sport would you like to play for the school? So in my ignorance, I wrote down rugby league, and the next day at school, and I was only just there in the first week of school, they asked for John Bray to stand up. So I stood up, and this master in front of about 1,000 kids said, "This is a rugby union college. We don't tolerate people playing rugby league here. That's it." And so I was humiliated in front of everyone else, and the good thing I did was I never played rugby. The first 15 didn't interest me. I didn't play rugby on a Saturday for the school, and I managed to do that. But in the 1988, when I was manager of the Kiwis, we played Great Britain down in Christchurch, and the PE teacher at Christchurch Boys High had played for the university's rugby league I think he trained up in Auckland, and he asked me if I'd like to train the Kiwis on the first 15 ground. I couldn't do it quick enough, so we had a training run on the first 15 ground at Christchurch Boys High, and I was invited to speak to the an assembly of all the kids afterwards, and so that was a rectification of the wrong I had about 34 years
That would have
previously.
that would have righted all the wrongs.
That was magnificent from my point of view, and that's what rugby league had to face in those days, and probably still does.
And John then carried on. He represented New Zealand at the International Conference in London in 1989. And then you returned to the board in 2008 to assist the NZRL overcome the dire situation the game was in, and you're a member of the Audit and Budget Committee. So that must have been tough times for the directors back then.
They went through a difficult period, and they restructured, and they got independent because the sport and recreation, the theme was that rugby league people didn't know what they were doing. They needed outside businessmen. You had their heads screwed on to run the game, and I think that's still the case. But so they brought in these people, and because of my background and my business experience, I was asked to help out. So which I welcome to do.
Currently, you're the chairman of the New Zealand Rugby League Museum Trust. How's that going at the moment?
New Zealand's rugby league has got a great history, and people don't realise how good it is, and it's not recognised as much as it should. And the New Zealand government, in my view, doesn't recognise it either. The benefits that rugby league does for the community, particularly in the underprivileged areas, has been immense. They've kept kids who've gone off the rails. They've looked after them. They've helped lots of people, and they've turned out much better citizens. So I had great delight in doing that, and coming back and looking after the museum, and we've preserved the history. It's all volunteers, all people who lived in the past, all people who love the game and want to see it preserved for the future.
And of course, just before we finish off, you worked for Air New Zealand most of your life as an accountant.
Well, I started off as an accountant, but I had a number of managerial roles. I was manager of the international routes at one stage, and I was manager of planning. I had to do all the forward planning for the next 10 years and get involved in all that sort of thing. And I had a lot of overseas travelling and a lot of things. But let me retell an interesting story which involves rugby league, which I also always delight in telling, is that we were doing some fairly extensive business discussions with Japan at one stage, and I was over there with another bloke and went into this meeting, and the bloke from Japan said, there was a whole team of them, said, All Blacks, All Blacks, All Blacks. And the bloke was with me, said, yes, and you play? And the bloke said, yes. And he said to me, what about you? No, I'm a rugby league man. Oh, what's rugby league? So I explained all that. And afterwards, over a few beers, the guy I was with said, oh, you shouldn't have confused them over rugby league. I said, I didn't even know you played rugby union. He said, I did in the third form at school. So he was bullshitting himself. Interesting was the next day we turn up, and the chief executive turns up from Japan Airlines, and he says to me, who's this bloke that plays rugby league? I want a word with you. So him and I went outside, and he said to me, I went to university in Sydney. He said, I know all about rugby league, and we did a deal on the spot. Right? And to me, that's rugby league.
That's correct.
That's rugby league.
Now, just one more thing. You've got a program on the desk there. Would you please open it up at a certain page and just show the viewers, please, John?
This is one of the embarrassments of embarrassments.
John gets embarrassed about this, I must admit, because I bring it up regularly.
Embarrassment of my life, and particularly with my when it came out, my freezing works and working mates in Hornby gave me hell about it for years and still do.
There's a handsome young man there that says, John Bray, the brainiest New Zealand player. And at that stage you probably were, John.
Thank you.
Okay, well look, John, thank you very much for that insight into your life of rugby league. Well over 50 years, and you try and condense it into 15 minutes, and I'm sure there's lots and lots more stories, but thank you for coming in today and doing the interview for us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.